Nora.
Welcome, comadres and friends. I'm Dr. Nora de Hoyos Comstock, the national and international founder of Las Comadres para las Américas. The leadership team and I are pleased to have you join us for tonight's teleconference as we're beginning our 17th year. Can you believe it? 17 years. It has been our privilege to support Latino authors throughout these 17 years, and we look forward to many more years to come. We'd also like to extend a warm welcome to readers following us on our live Twitter chat at Read Latino Lit. And tonight, please help us welcome authors Diana Rojas and Elba Iris Perez. But before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves on mute because we are taping. And if you can keep your video on if you want to. And we suggest you put yourself on speaker mode, but gallery works just as well. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. But first, let's start with our book club's history. Comadre Tess?
Good evening, everyone. I'm the project manager of Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York City. After a hiatus, Nora Comstock re-envisioned and relaunched the book club nationwide to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores, and to support our Latino writers. We started these teleconferences in October of 2006. We are in our 17th year of sharing works by Latino authors with all of you. We created the teleconferences and book club to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots and the different perspectives on Latino culture and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city or zone. We have clubs in 12 cities. There is sure to be one that can fit your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, why not help us start one? For more information about our book club, visit our website, latinolit.com. So please always invite others to join us. Comadre Karen?
Welcome, comadres and friends, to our August 2024 Zoom teleconference. I'm Karen Gonzalez, Assistant Coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, Denver Comadres Book Club Facilitator, and co-founder of the Colorado Alliance of Latino Mentors and Authors. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our first interview is with Diana Rojas. Diana grew up in Connecticut and New Jersey, a journalist with a degree from New York University. She has worked for The Record, USA Today, Reuters Events, and other publications. She lives in Washington, D.C. Litany of Saints is her first novel. Interviewing Diana is Sonia Adams, a native of New York City. Growing up in the Little Caribbean section of Brooklyn fueled her interest in learning about people across different ethnic backgrounds. Sonia is passionate about reading, creative writing, and issues of diversity, equity, and social justice. Sonia currently works as an English instructor while pursuing doctoral study at St. John's University. Take it away, Comadre Sonia.
Thank you, Karen. And good evening, comadres. I'm so excited to discuss Miss Diana Rojas's new book, Litany of Saints. It's a collection of 3 novellas centered on characters of Costa Rican heritage who are striving to live dignified lives in their homeland and in the United States. Good evening, Ms. Rojas.
Hi, Sonia. So nice to talk to you tonight.
Yes, nice to talk to you too. For those who haven't read A Litany of Saints yet, Ms. Rojas, can you provide a short synopsis of your book?
Sure. My book is a triptych of novellas about people who face challenges to their perceptions of who they think they're supposed to be and who they actually want to be. And all of my characters, all of my protagonists are either Costa Rican immigrants or emigrants from the same town.
Thank you so much. This is your book actually is the first book that I've read centered on characters of Costa Rican heritage. So I learned a great deal from the characters, their lives in Costa Rica and in the United States. What I take particular interest in is the theme of migration in your collection. I noticed that you explore migration in very different ways, and the characters experience different migration paths. For instance, in the first story, the characters experience migration from Costa Rica to United States. And also there's internal migration in the United States where one of the main characters, Felipe, he migrates to different states. And also in your second novella, La Tres Marias, you have some return migrations. So the parents, they migrate from Costa Rica, they build a life in the United States. And then when they fall on hard times, they return with their daughters. And then later on, they decide to make the migration back to the United States. And then lastly, you have the main character, Juan Manuel, who returns. So you have a return migration from the United States back to Costa Rica. So I'm curious to know, what motivated you to explore migration in your collection of novellas?
The reason I did migration is because I've always found, I'm a child of immigrants. I'm born in the US, but I'm a child of immigrants. And I always found that migration is so hard, right? Because just as regular humans, we try to invent ourselves and reinvent ourselves. But when you're coming from somewhere else, you're faced with these headwinds of expectations. Not only your expectations of what it means to be where you're going, but what other people might see you as. And then you still have to find yourself. So I thought if I was going to write a story about seeking for one's own identity, I was going to throw the curveball that I observed growing up. And that was people trying to do this as migrants. I also moved to Costa Rica when I was 11, and I stayed there till I was 13. And I experienced the sense of never really belonging one place or another, which I think is a very, it's a very interesting thing that happens to migrants. You leave someplace and you don't really belong where you're going, and then you return. This is why I introduced return migration. You return and you don't quite fit where you belong, where you came from either.
Mm-hmm. And also too, with, you know, migrating to a new country, you often immigrants encounter issues of assimilation. And also what often motivates immigrants to come to a new country and establish, you know, a more successful life is this idea of the American dream. So I'm curious to know, how would you define the American dream?
Ooh, loaded question, Sonia. What is the American dream? Isn't it a very individual dream? Wow, okay, I had these characters come not under duress. Nobody came escaping war or a terrible situation. And I did that deliberately because I wanted them to seek out their own American dream. And so here's my definition of the American dream. You leave a small country. So, okay, American dream coming from a small country. You leave a small country where you're a little bit caged in because that's what happens in small countries. Everybody knows each other. This is how we do things. This is how we've done this forever. And now you come to this big old United States, and it's as if somebody opened the door to your cage, and you're free to fly out if you want to, if you can, if you have the guts. So I guess my version of the American dream is flying out of that self-imposed cage and being whoever you want to be. I think it's really hard to achieve.
Yes, I would agree with you. And I just want to touch upon the metaphor of the cage. I noticed it's very dominant in all three of the novellas.
Mhm.
So I'm curious to know, you know, how you intended exploring this cage within the first story, The Lives of Saints.
So in the Lives of Saints, the cage is religion and culture. And I come from a really big family, and I also come from a very religious family. And there was this point. So it's not autofiction, but there are always touchstones when you're writing fiction where you mine your own personal experience. And there was a point where I decided this sort of religion wasn't for me, and I wanted to step away. And I was born in the US, and I found it really hard to step away. So if I took a step back and started imagining somebody who came with their family and they saw that open door of the cage and said, what if I didn't want to live this very traditional religious life? What if I didn't believe it? What if I just didn't want it? How hard would it be to step away from your family and say, this is the new me, this is who I want to be? And so I put that tension of having a husband and wife in the book, in the story, because in all cultures, migrant or not migrant, you leave your family if you partner up with someone and you create a new partnership or a family if you have one, and you get to create your own traditions. So I did this for these characters so that there would be a tension between one who feels ready to get out, to fly away, and one who, I mean, she really likes her cage. She's so comfortable in there. She's not afraid in there.
And I would also say too that this cage influences or impacts the identity of the main characters, particularly the protagonist Ruth. Can you talk about your motivation for creating Ruth in particular?
Yeah. So I love women. I watched so many women in our family, and in traditional Costa Rican families, like many other Latino families, it's a patriarchy, and the man's ideas are paramount. And this is especially so that the generation I'm writing about is my mother's generation. Costa Rica has changed a lot, and in some ways is more, I would say, liberated than some things I observe in the United States. So I'm writing about my mother's family, where everybody, my mother's family, my mother's generation, where everybody really cleaved to their husbands and did as their husband told her. Well, what if your husband's telling you to do something that's against your father or your brother, and you like the idea? So this is why Ruth is torn throughout the whole story, where she has this, and I don't want to spoil the story for anyone. She has this idea that, oh, she needs to bring her husband, she needs to rein him in. He's just gone crazy with this idea of freedom. And then she starts realizing maybe she wants to be free too. Why was this not her choice? Why did she not do this? And the story is her looking back on her life. And so she's describing a lot of the choices she made and a lot of the reason she made those choices. But she's still alive, and she's thinking, shoot, I made a mistake. Maybe I need to rethink this all.
And I think you do such a great job of capturing Ruth's inner thoughts, her feelings, her observations of her family members, you know, and her children, Felipe, her husband. I just thought it was so interesting the way you did that. And, you know, what's interesting about Ruth and the other characters, Felipe, Joaquin, her brother, her eldest brother, right, who's considered to be the family saint, right, and later becomes the patriarch. For some readers, they could be considered to be complex, and maybe for other readers, they may appear to be common or relatable because they could be someone in their family, it could be a friend. So some of the traits that the characters have, or the dynamics that impact their life in terms of gender and class and race.
Yes.
For me, I could see some of Ruth in some of the women in my family, older women I've encountered, you know, and I think that draws the reader in. And I remember in an interview that you were featured in, you emphasize how your characters are relatable.
Yes.
And so I'm curious to know if that element of the characters being relatable, was that intentional in exploring this story of Ruth, who's caged in based on religion and family?
Absolutely. I really wanted to tell stories about seeking identity and trying to find yourself. And in order for my reader, if I made it too niche, if I made it too unique, then I felt like the reader would not see the universality in my stories. And I feel that this search for identity is universal. I think everybody, in fact, I'm going to call it a compliment, because one of my readers, one of my first readers was the mother of my son's best childhood friend. My son is 25. And she read my book, and then she waited weeks. And I thought, oh, she must have hated it. She doesn't want to talk to me. I'm not going to reach out to her. Then she called me and she said, I've got to tell you, I read your first novella, and I was so angry at you. And I was so angry at you. I was so angry at my son. I was so angry at your son. And it was because I thought, how dare my son go tell our family stories to this other family? And how dare she write about our family? I never heard her family stories. I have no idea what she's talking about. But in making my characters relatable, I angered a friend. I'm sorry. We're back together. She's over it. She understands and she believes me. But I made other people be able to reflect on their choices, their lives, or recognize somebody that they like or hate, or I just wanted that to be the experience for people to read it and say, well, I'm not exactly like Ruth. I'm not exactly like Felipe, but I get their motivations. I understand.
Wonderful. And I just want to touch upon the two other characters that I found particularly striking in this novella. Joaquin, who is the eldest brother, he's given the title by his mother as the family saint.
That's right.
And as we know, the story, the title of this novella is called story, I'm sorry.
The Lives of Saints.
Yes, thank you. Yes, The Lives of Saints. So I'm curious to know, what drew you to that idea of the family saint?
I mean, doesn't every family have a member or several members who are just put up on pedestals and everybody's like, oh, geez. Well, first you revere them, and then you either question them or you never question them. But I think they exist in every family, this perfect person, this wonderful person that you don't hate because they are wonderful people, but your behavior, your life is based on theirs. And I just thought it was almost comical when when I was writing this, and I decided, oh yeah, no, I'm turning Joaquin into the family saint, not just the know-it-all, not just the heavy-handed male. I wanted him to have an almost mythical quality, because if I could say that he might be a stand-in for the myths that we create, that immigrants create when they leave a place, and then the place they came from becomes excellent in their memory. They don't remember the bad parts, they only remember the good parts. And it becomes almost like this, it caught in amber, this amulet that they reach in and rub and say, it's so shiny by the end of their lives, because they rub it and it's their security blanket, it's their cage, it's their saint. And it's something they go to remember how to behave, how to act, how to adapt. And I guess I did it half in jest, but I thought it fit so perfectly that hey, I kept them. I just made them saintlier and saintlier every time I wrote about him.
Yeah, so I'm gathering from you, it's emotional, and I also read it as perhaps it was spiritual, being this idea connected to Catholicism.
Yes.
You know, so that's how I kind of viewed it a bit, which I thought it was a unique play on that idea of this character as the family saint. Yeah.
I had a piano teacher once who told me that she kept a bust. She was a nun, and she kept a bust of Beethoven on her piano because she said, I've turned him into my piano saint because if I look at him, I remember how I'm supposed to play, how I'm supposed to behave when I sit on this bench. So it's like all saints, right? This is why people keep statuettes of saints. It's to remind them whatever they're supposed to remember, that's what it's there for. That is my Joaquin.
And I thought it was also interesting too, how the mother gives Joaquin this dominance, this spiritual power that she kind of imposes on him from as an infant. And how that that follows him throughout his life. And it is interesting too, later on, without giving away a lot of the story, Ruth's husband, Felipe, it was really interesting how he viewed Joaquin from a philosophical standpoint. You know, he was able to see, you know, that he was a good person. He loved his family, but also with that title comes with a cost.
Right. What's the saying? The crown, the head that bears the crown, or it's heavy, the crown is heavy on the head that bears it. Yes, it is. It is. There is a line in the introduction to one of the introductory paragraphs to the Lives of Saint, where Ruth is talking about her mother. She's describing her past, and she says, my mother gave us all these roles in our lives, and we didn't know we could ever break out of it. Same goes for Joaquin. He was christened saint before he was really old enough to know what that meant. And he played that role his entire life. He didn't know he could break out of it. Maybe he didn't ever want to break out of it. But I think that happens in families a lot, where you gather at the Thanksgiving table and everybody knows their role. Everybody knows who's the funny one, who's the serious one, who's going to start the fight. I'm 54 and I still know my role. I still know what I'm supposed to do.
Yes, and that is relatable. A lot of readers, a lot of people can relate to that. I'm going to touch upon Felipe. He's a very complex character, and the reason why I say that is because later on in the story, again, without giving a lot away, we get a sense of how his feelings about religion, about the church in particular as an institution. And if you don't mind, Ms. Rojas, if you could talk about, what influenced you to bring in, the past abuses that children suffered within the Catholic Church. I think it's important to take note of that.
I brought that in because it's one of the things that I used to preoccupy myself with when I was a Catholic, and I'm no longer Catholic, but I was raised a Catholic, and I have respect for the church. I met many good leaders in the church, and then there was this really ugly mark, this very, very, very human mark on the church. It was a black mark, and my personal opinion is that it was and has been poorly addressed. And it's touched a lot of people. And it's not touched anybody I know personally. But I think as a writer, I sometimes obsessed on stories about it. And I thought, if I'm going to make the most complex character I can paint. Some people hate him, some people get him, some people just want to punch him in the face and say, seriously, dude. I did that deliberately, but nobody is just. Everybody has a backstory, everybody. And so that came to me one night when I was like, oh, why is this guy such a jerk sometimes? But why is he so good also? And I dreamt that up, not to use it trivially, but to explain why he can't even explain himself, because the damage is so deep and it's so tucked in so far away. And if you remember, he doesn't use it as an excuse for any of his behaviors. He just drops it like a bomb and then walks away from it. And he leaves everybody else to deal with the detritus. And so when I wanted to illustrate how we as humans don't always get our own motivations, I thought this is a perfect way to step away from, okay, here, I'm dropping this bomb. I don't know. I don't understand. How about the Mets?
Mhm. And what's also interesting about Felipe, I took notice, and perhaps you could speak on this as well, is that I feel like you work with stereotypes of men, use of men, particularly the womanizing, the alcoholism. In this case, I feel like you're bringing these issues in Felipe's life to kind of not only to expose it, but to, like you said, to show his frailties. However, he has issues with expressing himself, or even, like you said, trying to explain it to Ruth. So I'm curious to know.
I think humans are much more complex than good or bad. I think we're a real combination of everything. And I have a wonderful family. My family is huge. When I say huge, I mean like 33 first cousins, 100 and something second cousins, untold number of other cousins. And in this very huge family, there's sometimes themes that go through, and some of it's like, oh, I'm in Costa Rica today, right? And we were just driving by a street, and my mother said, oh, look at down there. That was my great-grandfather's property. And I said, oh, look at that. It's all built. And she said, oh, he lost it little by little, drinking and womanizing. And this was a theme I heard all my life. But great-grandfather, by the way, is a revered man. People still love him. And I thought that ability to see the good and the bad, or to see the bad and yet still know that there's good in people, is a gift, really. And that's why I included it in this book, and why I put it into this character, because I don't want to tell the reader what to think about this man. I wanted to make him complex, likable, dislikable, lovable, hateable. I wanted to make him human. And I thought I needed to include a lot of the flaws of people that, even though we love them, when you scratch the surface, you're like, ooh, that's interesting. I still love you.
Yes, thank you for that. I would like to move on to your next story, Las Tres Marias, which I thought was really interesting, how you explore the return migration. Caesar, his wife Carmen, and their daughters Pilar, Lorca, and Marisol. But when they moved back to Costa Rica, the daughters are stigmatized as gringas. And can you speak on that? Is this something that is common with children of children of immigrants who return to their parents' homeland?
Well, I think it's important to note that all of these stories, the telling of the stories is in the past, and Las Tres Marias in particular is in the early 80s in Costa Rica, when the country was still quite insular. Everybody now hears of Costa Rica because of the beaches, the volcanoes, the tourism. But back then it was, I think the people who came were the Quakers and missionaries. It was a very insular, old-fashioned country. So that that theme of Las Tres Marias, of where the girls come and they're stigmatized immediately, is actually the only bit of autofiction in this entire book for me. Is that when I moved to Costa Rica as an 11-year-old, my sisters and I were labeled gringas. And there were some girls who were told, you shouldn't hang out with them. They have a very bad reputation. Nobody knew us. It was just the reputation that Americans had of being non-conservative, non-traditional, maybe loose. And that was applied to us. And that's where the autofiction ends, because I actually had a great time. We had a wonderful stay here. But I wanted to explore the touchstones of Latin America. So the first one was religion, and the second one, you really can't look at Latin America without thinking, especially Latin America of the early 80s, without thinking of machismo and Marianismo, which is the inverse of it, where women start applying these same ideals to other women, and it keeps women caged into this patriarchy. So I deliberately made the girls, and I used a terrible word, and I have a hard time saying it out loud. I can write it. I say they're destined to become sluts. And I don't use that word lightly. It's a terrible word to apply to a woman, apply to a girl, because it is a black mark. It is a red letter on the forehead. It's something hard to live down. So I used it in this book because I wanted to show how hard it is for women not only to break out of machista environments, but then to believe in themselves again.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Rojas. We've come towards the end of our interview. I want to thank you for this opportunity to talk with you about your collection of novellas. You're a wonderful, gifted reader, and I wish you the best of luck on the page and in life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you. Thank you. This was a lovely conversation. Thank you.
Oh. Gracias, comadres. Our second interview is with Elba Iris Perez. Elba is from Aguas Buenas, Puerto Rico, and she spent her early childhood in Roanoke, Massachusetts. She has taught theater and history at the University of Puerto Rico in Arecibo, and now lives in Houston. She is also the author of El Teatro como Bandera, a history of street theater in Puerto Rico. Interviewing Elba is Comadre Gabriela Chavarria. Gabriela was born and raised in Mexico City. She joined Las Comadres Denver in 2018 and currently lives in Seattle, Washington. Take it away, mi comadre Gabriela.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen. And it is just such a great honor to interview you, Elba. I just, love the book. And I wanted you to start to share with, the comadres a little bit about the book, because not many of them have read the book, but through your synopsis, you're going to motivate them to really go and pick that up.
Sure. It's, well, first of all, hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me. It's a coming of age story about two children who come to the United States with their parents, and the mother does not like it in the United States. So the mother returns to Puerto Rico, and so the children are going to be coming and going between the United States and Puerto Rico. So it is, centers around the lives of the children and how they adapt or don't adapt, the difficulties that they have. And it's also about the workers, the Puerto Rican men who came to work at a factory in this place called Roanoke, at a paper mill. And so the father of these two children works at that paper mill. So it's also about this community that grows up, Puerto Rican community, around that paper mill in Roanoke, Massachusetts.
Great, thank you. And how much of the book is real and how much is fiction?
So it's, I wouldn't say semi-autobiographical because it would be too much, but it does have a couple of things that are real. I grew up in Orinoco, and that's why I wanted to write this book. My father worked at that paper mill, and so we grew up there because he had a job there. And he invited his family to come to Orinoco to work. And so the setting is real. The characters are all made up.
So you don't compare yourself to Andrea. I'm trying to understand some of the characters and
Right.
how, because one of the things I love about the book is how you speak from this young little girl, Andrea, and telling her story to us. So I think that's why we all got it like, oh, maybe this is her life.
It's
Your
not
life.
my life, but in a way, it's my life and the life of anybody who has, gone through the experience of coming to the United States, or the experience of having divorced parents, where one is in Puerto Rico or, another country, and another one is in the United States. It's anyone who has had the experience of having to adapt to living between two cultures. So it is my story in a way because I went through that experience, but the plot itself is Andrea's.
And it is so dramatic, to think that, a mother will take their children away from their father to another country,
Right.
even though it was their home country to begin with, and and the struggles of that early life, and and losing and missing and not feeling part of one society and then going to another society. So
Right.
how did you relate to that story?
To the story of the mother, or
The story of the struggles, because it sounds
right.
like you had a good childhood, uh you know growing in Orinoco, but so
Well, my
go ahead,
parents divorced, and so there are themes in this novel that I wanted to touch on, that I wanted to explore and expand upon, okay, and kind of write them in a more universal way that wouldn't be my story, and so one of them is that, how people in the United States talk about Latina mothers are so perfect, so dedicated, and so I'm trying to break stereotypes. I'm trying to break with stereotypes. So the mother in this novel is not like the stereotypical Latina mother. She's a real woman who has, desires to do other things with her life and doesn't necessarily want to live where and the way her husband wants her to. And then there's also, the stereotype about the men. Latino men, they don't care about their kids. They don't provide for their kids. They leave the women alone with the kids. Well, my father raised me. So I wanted to write about a male, uneducated man who is all of a sudden stuck with kids, and what he does. How do how does he work it out? So like I say, the plot is all made up, but there are themes like that of the male bringing up children that was something that I really wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and you touch a little bit on this, on the different characters, and I think all throughout the book you expose us to all of these different diversity of characters, from the local Huarnoco to when the children go to Puerto Rico and spend early on with their aunt or uncle, or and then also introducing us to a lot of the mental illness. I was totally torn, because Pablo and Andrea have this incredible relationship growing up. And then, you see this mental illness impacting later in life. So why were you so interested in connecting and weaving all of these issues into this really beautiful coming of age story?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, we are 6 brothers and sisters, and we're very close. And so, how the brotherly love takes you through difficult phases in life was one thing that meant a lot to me. And I wanted to portray, the relationship that children have with each other before adults, right? And how it affects them. When something happens to one of them, how does that affect the other? So that's where that's coming from.
Well, you really did a beautiful job. And I know you've probably seen some of the critics, and I wish the book had been, longer.
Me too.
Because, the second part, I wanted to know more, to hear more from the different characters, the same way you portray them at the beginning. But I know working with publishers and all of that is challenging. But why did you pick the title, The Things We Didn't Know?
Okay, that title was selected by the publisher.
Oh.
And my original title was Huarnoco. And so they said, no, that's just, not it, because nobody even knows where Huarnoco is. And honestly, a lot of people have asked me if it was a real place. So I think if that was a good idea, that they didn't keep the original title. But when they gave me this title, I said, oh my God, what does that even mean? The editor said, Elba, this book is a lot about what they didn't know coming here, what they didn't expect, what they expected. And I said, oh my God, it's actually perfect.
It is perfect.
It means, what Diana was just talking about, the expectations, that people have or that they don't have. The American dream, that they're expecting. And then they get here and the mother says, I'm not going to live here. I'm going back, So it's everything that they didn't know that the United States and that American dream entails,
So another question we had for you was about the different characters. I know some of them are, more difficult to write and some of them are more fun to write. What were your most difficult characters to write and one, that were, fun to write?
So Gabriela, when I wrote this, I'm white. And so I just kind of kept including, white people. And I'm a historian. And at one point I remembered that one of my professors was insisting in class that when we write any history, we include people that have not been included that are not included in the patriarchal, literary canons. And so I remembered that class one day, sitting there in class, and I said, oh my God, what am I doing? I have to change my characters. And that's when I created Machi. So I created a character, two characters, her and her father. Her father is a Black man. And, because I thought, what is wrong with me? There are Puerto Ricans of every color, and I am only talking about this white family, but around them, there are a diverse world. There's a diverse world. And so not only did I think of that in terms of race, but gender and gender preferences. And so I had pretty much created the entire book. Actually, I had submitted it, and it had won the prize that it won with Simon & Schuster's Books Like Us contest. And I said, when we work on this book, can I please change the race of my characters? And they said, yes, of course. I said, oh my God, because I just don't feel happy with what I've done. And so, yes, that was an agreement from the beginning that I would work on creating a more diverse cast of characters. And so
Well, thank you.
The most fun was creating Machi. To answer your question.
Okay. I love Machi too. I thought it was amazing. And what I love too is that you brought her to the United States. And even though, the father was this, very difficult, racist, and, he welcomed her. He welcomed her because she had done so much for his kids.
Right. Right. And I did that because I have seen that in life, people can change. We can change people. If we didn't believe in change, then life would be useless. Anything that we do would have no purpose, right? So we have to believe that people can change, that change is possible. And so I wanted to show that, a character who is very racist and homophobico, right? And he is all of a sudden hit in the face with what are you going to do now that this person has been so good to you? Are you not going to accept her because she's Black or gay?
Yeah, no, that was I love Machi. We have so many of the comadres. This is more of a personal question to you. We have so many of the comadres here that are just incredible creative writers and always telling stories, always, trying to represent culture. And clearly you have mastered that creative writer.
Thank you so much, my God, for a compliment.
No, and so I want you to share some, lessons for all of these incredible comadres that do a lot of creative writing.
Okay, well, I have a big lesson, and if Nora is still here, she's gonna love it.
She's probably there.
Okay, so I wrote this book. First of all, try to find things that are unique about your story. Okay? Because we all have a lot in common, but your story has something that is different, that is unique to you, your family, your situation, your plot. And then just write it. Forget about writing, whether you know how to write or you don't know, or who you know or anything, just write the story. You're not a writer until you write. So you have to put it down. People tell me, oh, I have this working on this book. And, you know, after a long conversation, you realize the person hasn't written anything. It's all in their head. Get it on paper. So then I have to tell the story of the first writers' conference that Las Comadres para las Americas did in New York City. And I don't know if you were there, but I went there with my manuscript. And I met this editor, Marcela Landres, whom I think many of you know. And I spoke with her and we agreed that I would send her my manuscript. And I did, and, you know, paid her a fee because this is her work. And so I sent her the book, and she called me, which was part of the agreement that she would call me, and we would have this 1 hour long conversation. And she says, Elba, you're a very creative person, but you don't know anything about writing a novel. And I said, okay, I've spent all this time doing this, and I don't know what I'm doing. Is there anything I can do about it? And she said, yes, you can take some online courses. And to make a long story short, I had just finished my doctorate. And this woman is telling me that I have to go to school to write a novel. You know, and at first I thought, wow, I thought writing was going to be so easy. Well, writing is easy, but then editing it is another story, you know? And so my point is, it doesn't matter what your story is. You know, you need to know how to write. You need to learn how to write. I went to UCLA online courses. I took the online courses. And so that she recommended. And so my recommendation is learn the craft. Write your story, let it come out of your mind, out of your brain, you know, make everything up that you want, be creative, get as crazy as you want on paper, but then you've got to get down to the nitty-gritty of developing the plot, of working on developing the characters, learning how to describe, you know, how can you describe a tree? Well, all of us, we've all seen trees. It's not an easy thing to do, right? So imagine when I started describing Orinoco, which is a wilderness, I thought, what do I do? What can you describe? Okay, everybody has seen trees. So I'm going to bore a reader describing trees. How do you do that? And so it's basically those two things. First of all, have a story that is unique, that is your story, that no one else can tell. We're all Latino, but we all have different stories. Tell yours, enjoy it, have fun with it, and then get to work. Read about writing and do everything you can to learn the craft.
Thank you, Elba. And I'm sure that, you know, many of them are listening. And I hope you continue to write and receive these incredible awards that you so much deserve. And we were just thrilled that you joined us today. And I can't wait to hear, you know, the rest of the comadres as they start, you know, reading the book. And, you know, and we'll be keeping an eye out for your next book.
Yes, it's already
thank you so much.
And submitted, so we'll see when it comes.
Wonderful.
Up. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Wonderful to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow. Thank you, comadres. I mean, it was both of you. Such amazing writers, and the interviewers, thank you so much. So really, thanks to you both and to your publishers, Arte Público Press and Gallery Books, for their generous donation of books to our early registrants. Thank you as well to our interviewers, Comadre Sonia Adams and Gabriela Chavarria. And we also want to thank our audience for taking the time to join us tonight. And to those that submitted questions, we would like to thank all the volunteers without whom this book club and all the associated work would not happen. Truly, mil gracias. And please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble. There's also examples of how to write this on our Latino Lit website. So go look there if you're being challenged to write a review. Because these reviews carry weight with the publishers as well as other readers. And buy books to support our authors. And if your library doesn't have a book you want to read, ask them to order one. And please attend your virtual local book club meetings and bring a friend or two. And remember, our book club is open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinos, all are welcome. Our September books are The Bullet Swallower by Elizabeth Gonzalez James and Huizache Women by Estela Gonzalez. Again, thank you all for your continued support to our book club and Latino literature. And please join us in celebrating Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club throughout the year by buying books and supporting Latino authors. Good night.